Some legends are told, some turn to dust or to gold, but you will remember me for centuries.
This is The Cameron Parker Show, brought to you by Spreaker, where we discuss everything from around the local professional sports scene in Colorado, such as the Denver Broncos.
Chris Harris comes out. I don't know if he was on the drive, but he said, I knew 15 seconds into that game that I should have been on T.Y. Hilton. If players are coming out and saying that, and it falls again on the coaching staff.
Not to mention insiders from around your local sports scene. Ryan Spilborgs, former outfielder for your Colorado Rockies.
It's not going to be the 25 guys that leave spring training that are going to be the only guys the entire season. I mean, you need depth. You need guys that are going to be in your minor leagues that you may not expect.
Ryan Edwards.
You know, when you're talking about an offensive line, it's about the five best guys, right? And you're talking about the five best guys gelling. There hasn't been a lot of time for that.
It's showtime. Are you ready? Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. It is another edition of the Cameron Parker Show, and as always, we will be broadcasted live on Spreaker. And this time we're going to do something a little bit different. You guys can tune in and watch me live on Periscope. I typically, in the past, before I came onto Spreaker, I decided to jump on and do a visual show necessarily of the Cameron Parker Show. So please do watch the broadcast, listen to the broadcast on Spreaker, on iTunes, and now on Periscope here tonight. It's going to be a little bit of a special broadcast so that you guys can get a feel necessarily to what could potentially I look like necessarily. People usually coin the term the face for radio, and well, here is the face necessarily. I am going a little bit differently today, obviously with the muscle shirt and also with the Suns Out, Guns Out muscle shirt. So thank you guys very much for tuning in. We are going to be talking all things Denver Broncos, and this is the Cameron Parker Show. So please like the Cameron Parker Show necessarily. Follow it on Twitter. It is at CP_show. Also follow my current Twitter handle. It is actually the Twitter handle that is currently being broadcasted on Twitter, and that is at Cameron Parker PO. So thank you guys very much for tuning in. We always typically will have a show every Tuesday and every Friday, really. So thank you guys for tuning in. We will be talking all things Denver Broncos. We're going to be getting comments flowing in. I have a comment section in the Spreaker section, and as evidenced by the Periscope times that I've done a show, we've really, really when you think about it, you have to be impressed that. Well, I'm going to get your guys' comments, and we have already had one comment come in right now. We will be talking all things Denver Broncos. And with that means we are going to be talking about the offensive side of the ball, the defensive side of the ball, what needs to happen in order for the Denver Broncos to get better from here. Now, more importantly, I want to be sure to let you guys know to please share this broadcast. Share this Periscope broadcast with your followers, with your friends, and your family. I want to make sure that the Cameron Parker Show gets broadcasted to as many different airwaves and to many different places. So like it, share it, you got it, and we will be sure to get these comments that you guys will contribute on the Periscope broadcast on the air. So thank you guys very much for tuning in to the Cameron Parker Show on Periscope, on Spreaker, and it will soon be broadcasted on iTunes. So like I said in the past, of when you guys have been listening to the Periscope Show and watching the Periscope Show when we've done NFL draft coverage and all the Periscope broadcasts entirely, what I've been trying to do is I've been trying to make sure that I can get your guys' comments on the air. And so I think that I really do think that if you look at it from the scope of the Denver Broncos right now, they have to find themselves a Denver Bronco quarterback. A Denver Bronco quarterback that is going to lead that franchise. We all thought it was going to be Paxton Lynch the minute he was drafted. We all thought it was going to end up being Brock Osweiler when he was drafted. You know, Trevor Siemian showed some decent promise, I guess, for a first-year quarterback. So ultimately, you have to find us an actual solution. You know, for John Elway's sake, all of the quarterbacks in this roster right now, he has sole possession of. And as far as that he has been connected to. So it's important and it's imperative for John Elway to find his quarterback. Now, Brock Osweiler necessarily was his first quarterback. It was the first quarterback that he wanted. He took Brock Osweiler over Russell Wilson. He took Brock Osweiler over Kirk Cousins as well. And it's potentially that Kirk Cousins effect, which could add a weird dynamic to the point, well, the Broncos could have Kirk Cousins in the offseason. So it's a very interesting dilemma for the Denver Broncos. You know, I really do think for the Broncos, they have to find a way to secure that quarterback spot. If they can secure the quarterback spot, you will solidify a lot of the problems that you've had. The offensive line has been horrendous. I mean, but you look at it overall, though, the last few weeks, the offensive line is getting better. You've seen the production of Connor McGovern, you know, start to play a little bit, and it appears that he's starting to solidify that guard spot. And if you look at it, really, Connor McGovern should have been starting since preseason, at least since this preseason, or really at least since maybe even last preseason. You know, Connor McGovern was a guy that when you look at it, he really was the guy that was drafted, I believe it was in the 3rd or 4th round. He has incredible strength. He is mobile. He does lack a little bit in pass protection, but he's strong. He can move a lot of bodies. And I do think that the future is incredibly bright for a guy like a Connor McGovern in this Denver Broncos offense. And if he can secure a right guard spot, a left guard spot, potentially a center, give them potential flexibility on that offensive line, it's going to solve so many issues. You know, obviously Matt Paradis, it's been coined that he is one of the best centers in football, but the lingering hip issues are a problem. The lingering hip issues for Matt Paradis are a problem, and Connor McGovern has shown the ability to be capable enough, and at least has shown the propensity that he is willing to learn center. And it's important for a guy that is still trying to fight for a spot to show that versatility and show that drive that he wants to be on that starting offensive line, and Connor McGovern has certainly shown that. Now, once the Broncos have actually solidified this offensive line, it will move them forward into potentially getting that quarterback position solved. And if they can get that quarterback position shalved, right? It's a different word for solved. It is imperative that, yes, my high Chris, that they make Kirk Cousins come to Denver. Kirk Cousins, as I have heard that Kirk Cousins is their number one priority. If everything comes into priority, as far as re-signing Cody Latimer, you know, we heard today of rumblings that Cody Latimer potentially could be re-signed. I was hearing it actually last week. So I think if you can look at this situation for the Denver Broncos, they have to do all they can to secure Cody Latimer before he hits free agency. And it's a reminder that this is not the last time that the Denver Broncos have done something like this with a potential upcoming free agent. When you look at it with Cody Latimer, he will potentially join a fellow wide receiver. He will also join Derek Wolfe. He will join Chris Harris and a bunch of others that Elway has signed before he hits the market. You know, just think about for a second. You know, and obviously John Elway has been under a lot of fire. He's been joined under a lot of fire necessarily. So if you really look at it, over the grand scheme of things, John Elway has really done a great job of, as far as a businessman, to try and sign players before they hit free agency, before the actual price of that player actually goes up. So I believe that if you actually look at it from just the sole business perspective on Cody Latimer, if you get him to sign a 4-year, maybe a 3-year, worth roughly $4 million a year, and maybe go between 6 to 10 million guaranteed, you're going to actually get him for a really good price, and a good price to the point where he actually might actually earn a significant contract, and especially when you look at the scope for the Broncos is trying to add a quarterback, and if it is Kirk Cousins, they need to be as cost effective as possible. And when you look at for the Broncos, they have to determine that, because if they do, well, then you're going to be all in no matter what for Kirk Cousins. And in order to do that, there will be a lot of question marks on the roster and on the team in general that will make you potentially punch a wall. And I hate to phrase it like that, but it will make you punch a wall potentially of some of those moves that the Broncos could end up making, such as cutting Aqib Talib or taking a pay cut for Aqib Talib. It certainly would be great to see Aqib Talib take a pay cut, but you're going to have to cut a lot of people as far as, or at least cut ties with some really good players in order to have enough money to sign Kirk Cousins, because Kirk Cousins is going to demand 18 to 25, probably at max, 25 to 30 at max, necessarily of a contract. And that is a lot of money for the quarterback position. And the fact is, it is a quarterback-driven league, folks. It is a quarterback-driven league. And while it is so nice, certainly, for the Denver Broncos to have a defense that will win you championships, it is a quarterback-driven league, however, but defense wins championships. So the Broncos now have to consider this gray area. They have to consider this gray area for the Broncos, and that is, do we want to release everybody that is on the defensive front, whether that is Aqib Talib, a Brandon Marshall, maybe even a Derek Wolfe, he actually decides to retire. The issue with this is that the Broncos defense was still legit good this year. They were in the top as far as a lot of categories defensively. Total defense, passing defense. They were all across the board number one, if not number two, everywhere. So it's important for the Denver Broncos to go at this effectively and smart. And if you're Kirk Cousins and you're looking at it from this front, I think you have to understand, or you have to have a conversation with John Elway especially, because if there's that case where, and I'm throwing out a very small potential of what could happen, let's just say that the Denver Broncos, as constructed right now with the defense and everything else, let's just say that they end up going in all on Kirk Cousins, and they just talk to Kirk Cousins and they say, hey, how much money will you want to have, in essence, to be a starting quarterback for the Denver Broncos? Because we already have a defense for you. Because we already have potentially a good enough offensive line now that the Connor McGovern situation could potentially be resolved. So I think ultimately Kirk Cousins needs to be asked the question, would you take less? He needs to be asked that question. Should you be given less of a contract for the opportunity? And I can't believe I'm saying that because the Broncos had such a crappy season. But the fact is, should they actually be given that question and that ultimatum necessarily to Kirk Cousins? Should you want to sign a $12 to $15 million contract for 3 or 4, for 3 or 4 years, maybe even 5 years, for the opportunity that you're going to play with another great defense, or a great defense rather for the Denver Broncos in the next year? I think it's a question certainly that has to be asked. But at the same time, you also have to go with the ultimatum that you still have to release players on the defensive side of the ball, on the offensive side of the ball. And whether that's a guy like C.J. Anderson. C.J. Anderson's a guy that is searching for his first 1,000-yard season. He is searching for his first 1,000-yard season. Now, look, I've been incredibly critical of C.J. Anderson over his time, at least this season. I felt like his initial contact has been not the best. He does struggle in that area. However, the one area that he does make a lot as far as a good impression, and that is once he has that initial contact, while it's terrible, while it is not the best, that he proves that he can move the pile as often as he can. So despite the fact that the initial contact is bad, C.J. Anderson has shown the propensity to move tacklers and get positive yardage about every single play. Now, I do believe that if C.J. Anderson was given the ultimatum because of everything that's happened, he will have a come-to-Jesus moment, to use that phrase. He will have a come-to-Jesus moment of realizing, well, maybe I should be better suited elsewhere. For a team like, I was going to say New Orleans, but obviously the emergence of Alvin Kamara and now Mark Ingram actually getting 1,000 yards for 2 straight seasons, that option's out the window. But I do think a team like a shotgun team, necessarily like a New Orleans Saints team, will benefit a guy like a C.J. Anderson. He's shown that he's been very successful in the passing game, and he's a good enough pass protector, and especially from the fact that he's shown comfortability as a runner. And he's shown comfortability as a runner to run in the shotgun. And that's important. Really, that is very important for a runner as far as comfortability. Now, he's been okay necessarily as far as running under center. He's been under center. You contrast that necessarily with Adrian Peterson and him going to New Orleans. Adrian Peterson was a guy that spent 90% of his snaps under center. And then you translate that to C.J. Anderson. C.J. Anderson ended up then kind of going a mixed bag. Unlike when he was with Peyton Manning, where Peyton Manning was predominantly in shotgun. And then you look to the stance of when he was with Gary Kubiak. They actually decided to go under center a little bit. And he ran okay, not effective as in the shotgun, but he really showed the capability that he can run there. So I do believe if you are the Denver Broncos, you have to show that you can win in the trenches if you can get yourself a solid right tackle. You also have to show that you can solidify a guard spot, which in my estimation appears to have been solved. But more importantly, they have to decide that the quarterback position is the best alternative for the team and that they have to spend money there. And as I outlined, they have to spend money in order to get the biscuit. They have to spend money in order to get the biscuit, and that biscuit is Kirk Cousins. This is the Cameron Parker Show, and please do follow the show handle at CP_show. Obviously, this Twitter handle, which is broadcasted on Periscope, at Cameron Parker PO. So thank you guys for tuning in, watching me. The Face for Radio actually has a face, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not just words. So thank you guys very much for tuning in. You guys can also listen to this broadcast. So obviously you guys are seeing a face, and you guys have some comments rolling in. But you guys can also listen to this podcast that will be aired on iTunes. Subscribe to the Cameron Parker Show podcast on iTunes. Write a review. Also listen to it on iHeartRadio. If you guys have the Amazon Echo, you guys can say, I want to listen to the Cameron Parker Show, and the Cameron Parker Show will air for you on the Amazon Echo. And you guys will listen to me on the go necessarily. You guys can listen to me on the phone necessarily. So it's you guys can take me anywhere if you guys feel like it. You can take this Periscope broadcast for all that I care. You can take the Periscope broadcast and decide to listen to it. So let's move in now to this Cody Latimer discussion. Basically, if you're looking at it from the Cody Latimer discussion, this is another reason, and it takes me to this discussion of this is imperative as to why fans, and I'm calling out the fans, this is imperative as to why fans have to show 150% patience when it comes to draft picks. Look, I realize that Isaiah McKenzie's had a horrible year. I realize that Garrett Bowles has been one of the more penalized tackles in the National Football League. But understand, Garrett Bowles was also one of the more penalized people in college football, and he's also played college football. He hasn't actually played college football, and he actually hasn't played football nearly enough. So the comfortability level is still growing with the 27-year-old. And while the age could necessarily be a factor, the fact is he is a raw tackle. And like Cody Latimer, as far as being raw and potentially being that player, it takes an incredible amount of patience from the fan base to realize that and to understand how much it takes. Example, look at Cody Latimer. Cody Latimer has spent 3 to 4 years trying to earn a spot as a number 2 to number 3 wide receiver on the team. He couldn't even crack a number 3 wide receiver at some times. But the fact is that with perseverance and with the amount of drive to get to that point of being a number 3 wide receiver, he has now put himself into a situation that will now earn him a contract from either a new team or from either the Denver Broncos. And it's important to understand that it takes patience. Look, and again, Isaiah McKenzie's had a bad year. He's fumbled a lot. You know, he was nearing a record, you know, for fumbles as far as a rookie in your first year, and especially with a punt returner. But the fact is, in essence, this is the reverse of Trendon Holiday, ladies and gentlemen. When Trendon Holiday came into the league, he was viewed as small. He was viewed as a guy that will just take it to the house and fumble a lot. Does sound a lot like Isaiah McKenzie. But understand, when Trendon Holiday came into the league, he was an immediate punt returner, and then once he came with the Denver Broncos, and once he started becoming a successful punt returner, he started fumbling the ball a lot. Isaiah McKenzie, on the other hand, is a guy that, well, he started his career off by fumbling the football. And he really has had one good punt return since then. Now, I realize that's not going to sit well with a lot of the Denver Broncos fan base, but it's important to understand that you have to show an incredible amount of patience to a lot of the people. You have to show a lot of patience when it comes to draft picks, and I'm being honest about that. If you show patience in a tackle, if you show patience in a wide receiver like a guy like a Cody Latimer, then Cody Latimer will end up reaping the benefits of a lot of playing time, because now Cody Latimer has now proven that he is not just a special teams ace. He's now shown the ability to be a special teams ace, and over these last handful of games, at least since week 8, that he has now shown to be a very, very worthy number 3 wide receiver. And again, you guys can say that I'm off my rocker, or, you know, that I'm completely off base by this. You know, but the fact is that it isn't just the fact that now Cody Latimer has now established the fact that he could be a number 3 wide receiver. But he's also now establishing the fact that could Emmanuel Sanders, and goes back to trying to find a quarterback. This goes back to the situation of trying to find a quarterback. So now, for the Broncos, it's now entertaining the thought of maybe we should cut ties with Emmanuel Sanders. maybe we should cut ties with Emmanuel Sanders for the point that maybe Cody Latimer should be our number 2 wide receiver, and then Carlos Henderson, a guy, mind you, that is very, very talented, and a guy that deserves the same amount of patience as a wide receiver, and is also a very good run blocker. So Emmanuel Sanders, who's shown the ability to be a big play threat, honestly should be taken as much seriously to be a potential spot necessarily on the roster of where might he be. So all the talk necessarily as well, will Demaryius Thomas be on the roster, or or will he end up accepting a pay cut necessarily? The fact of the matter is, it's Emmanuel Sanders potentially that this could affect. And you put Emmanuel Sanders on the New England Patriots, it's going to be a nightmare. It's going to be a nightmare. But that's basically the hand that you've been dealt, for the sake of wanting a better quarterback. See, that's the thing, is that all of this boils down to a quarterback. Now, the other issue with the Denver Broncos this season has been the inability to play those rookies. Now, it's kind of twofold with these rookies. You have to have playing time in order to grow. Look at Paxton Lynch. Yes, I say Paxton Lynch. Look at Paxton Lynch, okay? His rookie year. We all expected him to end up being the potential future of the Denver Broncos. Fact of the matter is, it's looking a lot like he's not the potential future of the Broncos. However, there's only one option of hope left, that he could be that future guy. And because potentially he is going to be that future guy, it's because of this last few games. It is potentially the last set sail, because people have called Paxton Lynch the Pirate. It is potentially the last set sail for Paxton Lynch potentially on this Denver Broncos team. Because if he does not pan out, well, then you're looking at drafting a quarterback potentially in this draft. Whether that is in the first round, whether that's in the second round, and so on and so forth. But the other situation that affects the Kirk Cousins dynamic is this option of cheap quarterback. Do you want to spend money on a quarterback that will get you $25 to $30 million? Or do you want to go after a young quarterback that will potentially, that will not only that, but will also give you the opportunity to grow with some of these young wide receivers? And while there's this notion that, you have a lot of wide receivers necessarily that are over the age of, potentially going to be over the age of 30. Emmanuel Sanders is going to end up being over the age of 30, and Demaryius Thomas is or will be over the age of 30 next year. So the Broncos have to do a good job of trying to find that middle ground, because their two best wide receivers are nearing 30, if not above 30. Then you go to the other wide receivers, and then that's where they're in their mid-20s. Carlos Henderson is nearing his 20s. In mid-20s. And then you have Cody Latimer, who's still in his 20s. And especially with a young quarterback, that's where, for the Broncos, it could be appealing, because of the fact you look at the situation that a young quarterback can grow with those wide receivers. They can grow with a guy like a Carlos Henderson. They can grow with a guy like a Cody Latimer. But also, they have a guy. They have a guy that is proven and is arguably the best Broncos wide receiver all time, and that he can be a viable option that the rookie quarterback can trust. It's important that they have an amount of trust. Now, granted, I firmly believe that they go hard after Kirk Cousins. But it's important to understand that it is also that money talks, and it's a quarterback-driven league. And while it's so appealing to draft a guy like a Baker Mayfield, and I've spoken to numerous people that, well, I feel that I like this class a little bit more than people will. And that's because, well, I feel like I'm not as versed in the expert area of scouting. But the fact is, I do believe if you were to go by what the Broncos potentially might do in this upcoming offseason, you're looking at it from the sense of you want to go hard after free agency first. And maybe you want to sprinkle in maybe the case that they want to look at the quarterback situation first on their own team, and then they go to free agency, although potentially they may have already got that situation figured out, and I think they might. If by chance that the Denver Broncos will choose tomorrow that Paxton Lynch will not start, well, there's your answer. There is your answer. That Paxton Lynch will not be on this football team potentially next year. And also, you will have... It's a given that Chad Kelly will be on their team next year. But it's also a given that maybe Brock Osweiler will be your sole backup. And maybe Chad Kelly will be on the practice squad again. The good news is he hasn't done anything stupid since he came into the league. While potentially some people view him as not a future on the Denver Broncos, I think he's very talented. I think right now he is the most talented quarterback on the roster. But by that standpoint, I do believe that Brock Osweiler has proven himself worthy enough, to be forgiven. To be forgiven because of the fact of how me and Broncos country have treated him ever since he left the franchise in 2015. And B, that he's shown the ability to be a stable quarterback for the Denver Broncos. If it comes to it, they can turn to Brock Osweiler to lead them to a victory if need be. But it's important that it's also realizing that Brock Osweiler cannot take him over the hump. Which goes back to a quarterback-driven league. Again. And therefore, it takes you to Kirk Cousins. And Kirk Cousins only. So, they have to determine the Broncos have to determine what is the best course of action for the team. I firmly believe that Kirk Cousins is coming here. Everything that I've heard, everything that I've, heard off to the side, makes it seem as if that Kirk Cousins is their number one priority. He's their number one guy. And Captain Kirk is going to take care of the Broncos, and I think he's going to jump on the Denver Broncos Enterprise, the USS Enterprise, and he's going to take them to victory. But with that is going to come a lot of cost. So it sounds like Kirk, Pelly. It sounds like Kirk. And I think it will be Kirk, and like I said, to kind of go back down to that other trail, because some people are filing in necessarily as some people that are listening in. I feel comfortable with this draft class and with the potential weapons that we have here. If the Broncos, just by happenstance, were making a mistake, I should say, of leaking information and saying that they aren't all that interested in the Denver or in this draft class, and they really are, well, then you guys are starting to look at a situation to all the quarterbacks that will be in that draft class. And I think that Lamar Jackson is a very interesting guy in all of this. Look, I realize that Lamar Jackson is not necessarily a guy that is on a lot of radars because of the Baker Mayfield and because of the fact that, they don't necessarily see him, and that they don't necessarily see him potentially as a good quarterback. The idea for me is why I really like Lamar Jackson is because he has shown the ability every single year. Lamar Jackson has shown the ability every single year since he's been with Louisville and since winning the Heisman of wanting to get better in the pocket. Obviously, the comparisons to Robert Griffin III are appropriate because we don't know if he can take care of his body over a course of a 16-game season. We don't know that. But the fact is that he is a playmaker with the ball in his hands. He is more athletic. He is more explosive with the ball in his hands, like Michael Vick, and more explosive than Robert Griffin III. And maybe right now he's a much better passer than Robert Griffin III. The issue will be, where is he as far as the amount of contact that he can absorb? And Mayfield too. I love Mayfield. I love Baker Mayfield. And I feel that, again, if Sam Darnold decides to declare, you're looking at the situation, well, I think you have to look at it of a Josh Rosen, a Sam Darnold, a Baker Mayfield, and a Lamar Jackson. I think of all those guys, I feel like of those four guys ranked, that's what I have right now. Sam Darnold is more cerebral. I think he's probably going to end up being the better prospect when all is said and done, if he decides to come out. And the best part is that if he decides to come out, and the Broncos do go after Kirk Cousins, and let's just say that they sign a right tackle in free agency or pull a trade to get a right tackle, then I'm going to say a situation that is spoiled. And I'm going to say it like that. And I'm going to say as with this situation that it also would be very great as far as the running back core moving forward. What if the Denver Broncos, obviously they potentially will have what appears to be the 8th to the 10th pick in the draft. I firmly believe that if Saquon Barkley is there in the top 8 and 10 range, you have to take him. You have to take Saquon Barkley. And if you can take Saquon Barkley, then you're looking at a great quarterback to running back combination, especially for Kirk Cousins. And if you're looking at a Devontae Booker who's shown the ability to be, viable enough in the passing game and underrated, it's going to bode well. And when you look at it, obviously Mayfield, being a young quarterback, his accuracy can translate, yes. But the scouts that I've spoken to said that potentially he has small hands. And small hands, when trying to grab a football, that could impact necessarily as far as him wanting to throw, a football downfield, or just throw a football accurately enough. Obviously, the accuracy in college football is there, but the thing with Mayfield that I just see a lot of is Russell Wilson. Drew Brees maybe is a high ceiling, potentially, because he's proven that he can throw the ball over the yard. And I feel that if for Mayfield, if it just comes out that it actually says that he has big hands, well, then he will be, without question, and it seals it, that he will be a first-round draft pick. Because the playmaking is there for Mayfield. He's shown the ability to move out of the pocket, a lot like a Johnny Manziel, really. I mean, I hate to compare him to I hate to compare him to a guy like a Johnny Manziel, but the fact is that he is Johnny Manziel without the headaches. Everything we wish Johnny Manziel could be, potentially moving into the future of a National Football League quarterback, Baker Mayfield potentially is that guy. So ultimately, I think the Broncos have to go with a route of, do we want to go cheap? And I hate to use the word cheap because of the fact, I agree with that. I do agree that Mayfield showed a little bit more than Manziel in the pocket. Obviously, they both were, street balling it, to use that term. They were both street balling it, in the backfield, and certainly proving that they are capable enough to run outside and make plays happen outside. And I think too that there is a interesting dynamic certainly that could be there for the Broncos, and it is if they choose to stay with Bill Musgrave. Kirk Cousins could potentially really benefit with Kirk Cousins, because Bill Musgrave could look at Kirk Cousins and say, we will give you free reign. We will give you free reign to do whatever it is that you want. And they can look at the Brock Osweiler tape of the Indianapolis Colts game, the run-pass option, which should have been given to Paxton Lynch. And by the way, I am on record. You guys can go back and look at my Twitter feeds. I'm an open book. I will let you guys know how I feel. I was wrong about Paxton Lynch. That said, you go back and you look at all the games that has happened with Paxton Lynch. What has been the most constant thread in the Paxton Lynch era, aside from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game that he played exceptionally well in? He was under center a lot. So it was very, very vanilla with Paxton Lynch. So that tells me, one, they are being very, very cautious with Paxton Lynch, that they don't want to expose anything. Now, if you look at it from the standpoint with that offense, obviously he's shown that maybe he can't pick up a playbook as often. Well, then do something about it. Make those run-pass options that you gave to Brock Osweiler in that Indianapolis Colts game. So if, in fact, he does start, which could be the case, could not be the case, if it is that case, well, then you're looking at a situation where the Broncos will have Paxton Lynch on their roster, and they will, depending on how well he plays in those two games, he will potentially be the starter that will be a year from now. But there's that alternative where we will keep Paxton Lynch on this roster, and this is probably the better alternative, is that we will keep Paxton Lynch on this roster and we will have him behind Kirk Cousins. Look, but again, I've been on record as being a Paxton Lynch fan, but I am telling you, with everything that I've seen on the field, it's not there. It's not there. And so I just feel that whether he is the starter or not, they won't be there. There's not going to be enough for the Broncos to be convinced that Paxton Lynch is the answer, whether he's on the roster next year or not. Whether it's Paxton Lynch, Brock Osweiler, and Kirk Cousins, the fact of the matter is that Paxton Lynch has proven that he is not the guy. So and especially with Chad Kelly. Chad Kelly again is the interesting guy, because now you're looking at three quarterbacks again. Whether Trevor Siemian's on the team or not, which I think he's a long goner. So I don't see him on the team next year. I don't see Trevor Siemian on the team next year. And Brock Osweiler could potentially have played himself onto another team. As crazy as it sounds, his play in against the Indianapolis Colts, he may have played himself onto another team. So, I think if it was between Brock, Pelly, if it was between Brock and Trevor, I would say to go Brock. Trevor has really regressed, sadly. He has regressed, sadly. And I do think that if you look at it with the Broncos, yeah, he's cheaper. Pelly. He's shown the ability to be cheap, but with this year and with everything that's unfolded, he's given a lot of games. And I hate to say it like that, but the interceptions have been terrible. I mean, they have been downright terrible. He threw arguably some of the worst interceptions I have ever seen. But, right, that's the thing, so we're talking about a backup, but I don't know if he's shown the ability to be a backup. And as far as what we've seen potentially with Brock Osweiler, especially with the Indianapolis game, and it was the Indianapolis game, it was against one of the worst defenses in football. Want to point that out there. But while all of that, it was the best quarterback game of the season. Maybe aside from Trevor's slinging over the yard Dallas Cowboys game this year. But the fact is that we can all agree the starting quarterback, the keyword starting quarterback, is not on this roster anymore. Or it's not on this roster currently. So Trevor Siemian, I don't see him on this team next year. Brock Osweiler, I see as the backup. I have no idea what they do with Paxton. I don't. But ultimately, it is Kirk Cousins or bust. It is Kirk Cousins or bust. Everything that I've heard, again, to reiterate, everything that I've heard has said that Kirk Cousins is the number one priority. So all the blogs and everything that you hear that's been out there as far as Kirk Cousins potentially could be the top priority for the Broncos heading into the offseason from everything that I've heard, is accurate. Is that Kirk Cousins is the guy, and from what I've heard is that he's, he had Elway as his idol, growing up as a kid. He loved playing like John Elway in the backyard. And so for him, it gives him that opportunity to play with his potential idol in the front office. And another point, too, that I want to bring up about Kirk Cousins that I don't think a lot of people are talking about. And, Pelly and Dean, who just tuned in, and Michael Gallegos has been turning on, here and there as well. I want to get your guys' take on it because of the fact that there is this point that I don't feel a lot of people are talking about. And it's this point that he played and it was in college, obviously. It was in college, obviously, at the University of Michigan State. But it's worth pointing out that he played with a great defense at Michigan State. He played with a great defense at Michigan State. So he has clearly shown and shown that comfort level in college, mind you, still. Obviously that's in college. But he has shown the comfortability to play with a great defense and give those chances necessarily to take those shots downfield to a guy like a Demaryius Thomas potentially, or to give a guy like, potentially like that. And he did play with a Le'Veon Bell, who is a unrestricted free agent. I just want to point that out. Obviously, I say he stays with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Pittsburgh Steelers tag him, but he is the one guy that literally throws a wrench in all of this as far as Kirk Cousins is concerned. And I hate to throw that out there, but he's the guy that really has thrown a wrench in all of this because I love Le'Veon Bell. The injuries do scare me quite a bit with Le'Veon. But Kirk Cousins has shown the ability to play with a great defense. And it's a point that's not being talked about a whole lot. So Kirk Cousins has to prove that he can do it once again. And the Broncos, if they lose Aqib Talib, now granted, is it going to suck? Absolutely it's going to suck that we lose Aqib Talib. But again, you have Bradley Roby, who has shown this season through all of it. He has shown the ability through all of it that he could be a number 1 or a number 2 corner on a lot of NFL football teams. Roby is a up-and-coming star, ladies and gentlemen. And you can go back and you guys can read my article that I put out on Predominantly Orange. It really started in that divisional playoff game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, where he played like Pat Tillman on that play to Tucson on the run. So, again, and Derek Carr, I wrote about Bill Musgrave too. You have to show a lot of patience. You have to show a lot of patience with a guy like Bill Musgrave. And he can work with a guy like a Kirk Cousins. Honest. It wasn't just Derek Carr that he did it to. As far as turning Derek Carr into an MVP candidate. Go back and look at his history. He went and he turned Matt Ryan into an MVP candidate. So, and if you especially look at Matt Ryan, what was the touchdowns and interceptions, about even in his first year? Absolutely. But then you go and you fast forward a few more years with Matt Ryan, the touchdowns, the interceptions, touchdowns started going up, interceptions started going down. So it was a great situation because Bill Musgrave was now getting a lot out of Matt Ryan. And so Matt Ryan was reaping the benefit of playing with Bill Musgrave. And same with Derek Carr. Okay, Derek Carr was horrendous his rookie year, his sophomore year. But really that year when he played with Bill Musgrave last year, he just took off. He took off to the point with great offensive line, but he played a lot like Aaron Rodgers, and I hate to use that term because I hate the Oakland Raiders, but he played a lot like Aaron Rodgers, to where he was just slinging it all over the yard. He was trusting his wide receivers, his good wide receivers in Oakland, of Amari Cooper and Michael Crabtree, So, and especially with a Clive Walford, and then now, well, they have Jared Cook, but still, they had good enough tight ends and great wide receivers. So there was enough around Derek Carr to potentially make it happen. Now, and this is the point, and Pelly, you bring up the point. It's the point that John has shown the ability to be comfortable in, and that is solidifying the issues in free agency so that when you go into the draft, you can go best player available. And if that best player potentially is a right tackle, congratulations. You just basically have protected, Kirk Cousins next year. And it is actually very conceivable that if they draft another tackle, that Garrett Bowles will move into right tackle. And this Connor Williams, who I've heard is very high on their board, and that they love Connor Williams, is that this Connor Williams will slide into left tackle, and Garrett Bowles will be a right tackle. So your future offensive line on the blind side and on the right side will be protected. That option is intriguing, and it's an option the Broncos are considering. And so I feel like if you can get a guy like that, it's going to solidify a lot of issues and be best player available. Now, there's another option for you guys. The Broncos could solidify their linebacker spot. In the top 10 with Raekwon Smith, the linebacker from Georgia. If the Broncos drafted Raekwon Smith, you would have Raekwon Smith and Brandon Marshall on your football team. If Brandon Marshall is here next year. But you would have Todd Davis gone. And then Raekwon Smith with Brandon Marshall. The Butkus Award winner. Now granted, that's obviously a first round pick. But I feel like if you do lose out on him, you're going to go and you can get a guy that I am very knowledgeable about, and that's the guy that plays for Iowa. You can get a guy like a Josie Jewell, who I feel is a lot like a Chris Borland. Chris Borland, Josie Jewell, the linebacker from Iowa. I feel like Josie Jewell is much like a talented Chris Borland who's going to stay in the National Football League. So there is a lot there as far as the linebacking core that the Broncos can go. Ultimately, though, you have to certainly be impressed with the Broncos and where they could potentially be. Now, granted, you have to understand is that it is also really hard. It is also really hard to get back to where they were 2 years ago. Is it not out of the realm of possibility that a lot could change in the offseason? Absolutely. And that a lot of change could be Aqib Talib is gone. Could be Brandon Marshall's gone. Could be Emmanuel Sanders is gone. Could be Darian Stewart that's gone. So ultimately, the Broncos have to choose the best decision for the football team. They have to make sure it's cost-friendly, or cost-appropriate, I should say, cost-appropriate for the team. And they have to prove that they are willing to spend the big bucks to get what they want. Now, there's also the option that Kirk Cousins, and I think that's what you're hinting to Pelly, who commented in. There's also this notion, we can talk about it more on Friday, that I also don't think is being talked about enough. The Broncos, as far as their expectations, were incredibly high this year, most notably from the fans, and I'm also one to blame for that. But for the sake of that, are we putting way too much pressure on Kirk Cousins? And he hasn't even been taking a visit here. He hasn't even signed here. But are we putting way too much pressure on Kirk Cousins potentially to try and succeed here, that it could be a potential turnoff for him? That's the question that fans and media need to ask themselves. Now, obviously, as players and sports aficionados, we, and especially players, we want all of that because we want to prove that we can be a successful player in this league. And especially with the Broncos, and especially with Elway still running the helm, it still is very much appropriate that John Elway is in the front office, because if he wasn't, then the potential of Kirk Cousins being linked to Denver would not be an option. So while John Elway is still being discussed as a potential problem, and exactly, that pressure comes with being a Denver Broncos quarterback. So you have to kind of understand the landscape when you're going in there. And if Kirk Cousins, he feels like he's a winner, and he also feels like maybe he wants to be a part of a front office that 120% believes in the guy, unlike Washington, who's just going to chuck one-year deals at him and franchise tag him every single year for a one-year contract, while as cost-friendly as it potentially could be. I think as Kirk Cousins goes, he wants to be paid the big money for a long time frame. And I don't think Washington's going to ever give him that. And I think if Denver can make the necessary moves, and disappointing moves, again, want to put that appetizer out there will be disappointing moves. That will happen for the Broncos. So it's important for the Broncos' sake, that they make the moves necessary to help them get Kirk Cousins. So it has been a very frustrating, and I haven't even talked about the head coach yet. So I haven't even spoke, talking's not a word, I haven't even spoke about Vance Joseph yet. and we were in an hour. That just shows you how incredibly bad this season has been for the Broncos. Is that you have a defense that is still good and at times showed some spurts that they are starting to lose as far as some years. But the defense still showed a lot of capability that it can win football games in the National Football League. So thank you guys very much for tuning into the Cameron Parker Show. And we'll be back on Friday. And I will be having a phone call, hopefully, as far as a potential guy, as far as being on the guest, as being a potential guest, and we'll see if I can make that happen. But as always, I'm going to try and see if I can do this every now and then. You know, doing a special broadcast with you guys, putting forth Periscope for you guys to potentially get a behind-the-scenes look, potentially. And Pelly will be talking Broncos, off the side of this Periscope broadcast. You know the Twitter handle, and that is at Cameron Parker PO. Hopefully you guys, can ask me some questions, and I love doing this with you guys. I love, mingling with all of the Broncos people and all the Broncos country and Broncos media members, especially, reaching out potentially what their thoughts are. So I want to appreciate you guys for making this Cameron Parker Show Periscope broadcast, Cameron Parker Show Spreaker broadcast, Cameron Parker Show iTunes broadcast. And Pelly, I know you are listening. It is on iTunes. I know that you've been gone a bit, but the Cameron Parker Show is on Spreaker. It's also broadcasted on iTunes. Go to the iTunes store and subscribe to the podcast. Write a review on it. You can write a nasty review. You can write a good review. But for sure, be sure to all of you subscribe to the iTunes Cameron Parker Show podcast. It's also on iHeartRadio as well. I want to throw that out there. And for those of you that missed, I'm also on Amazon Echo. So if you guys have an Amazon Echo at your house, maybe it's sitting right next to you, and you say, I want to listen to the Cameron Parker Show. You guys can do such that, and the Cameron Parker Show will play for you. It might just be a random dude named Cameron Parker that actually wrote a song in the 1950s or 1960s. So it's possible that it could be a guy that, was named Cameron Parker and was actually famous at some point. So, but there's a good chance that if you say, I want to listen to the Cameron Parker Show, you'll start listening to some episodes of mine that are on Amazon Echo. So thank you guys very much for tuning in on this Tuesday edition of the Cameron Parker Show. I'll be back on Friday. You guys won't be seeing my face this time. So you guys can do your tears and do the tear emoji. But again, thank you guys for tuning in to the Cameron Parker Show. And as always, go Broncos. And I will see you guys on Friday.